So just come in here. This is the. Just take a step in here if you don't mind. Excellent. Here. This is the Fisherman's Hall. Now this is an early version of the Methodist Church actually, and today it's an Airbnb. But so here now, beautiful there with the wisteria and the slates across from you. This was World's End, and it's ironic, given the name World's End, that was the gate through which the Spanish Empire took control of Kinsale. This is in September of 1601. Can you imagine 26 huge ships sailing to the harbour, delivering 3,500 Spanish soldiers? Why? Why did they want Kinsale? Well, I mentioned earlier the perfect sheltered harbour. The key for the Spanish, the wind blows towards England. The Spanish were at war with England. So they wanted this base on England's doorstep with the wind at their backs. For Queen Elizabeth, the Queen at the time, some say the Spanish taking of Kinsale marked a Cuban Missile Crisis of sorts back then. Her most feared enemy attempting to set up a base right on her doorstep. And even worse, Irish rebels prepared to help. So we were the Cubans in the area. And this led to a battle, a famous battle involving the Spanish, English and Irish, all fighting over control of the perfect harbour of Kinsale. And the date tells you a lot as well. 1601, look at England in 1601. The Queen Elizabeth, Scotland under a different crown, and just before Jamestown, 1607. What I'm getting at there is England had not yet made the leap towards a new world empire. But they were about to. And in that leap towards power, towards what eventually would be known as the British Empire, the English came right up against the Spanish dominance. Spain, meanwhile, stretching all the way around the globe. It was the first empire in which the sun was always shining, the Spanish Empire. See, this clash of empires, and the result was war. Although at the time it was presented as a religious war between the Catholic Empire of Spain and Anglican, or as King Philip of Spain would have described, heretic, Queen of England, Elizabeth. You probably heard of the Great Armada of 1588. That was the first main attack in this war, when the Spanish tried to invade England and failed. That was the first and Great Armada. Kinsale's fleet was the fifth and last of these Armada fleets. A great book written about it is titled The Last Armada. And it details the Spanish, the colour of the Spanish coming in here. They didn't have uniforms, they had red sashes and the officers' feathers in their hats. 3,500 Spanish brought barrels of provisions into Kinsale and siege cannons. Now they knew they were so heavy, so they came prepared. They brought oxen on the ships. Can you imagine the Spanish whipping the bulls and dragging these cannons into Kinsale and positioning them? They knew an English response was imminent. And it was. From Dublin, the English army were marching south. Within the month, thousands of English soldiers were outside the wall here, creating a siege. Spanish inside, English outside. And that siege, the siege of Kinsale, stood for about 100 days until it was broken by the Irish. We had to get involved, didn't we? And Ireland back then was tribal. In other words, we had these chieftains. They were like the clans of Scotland or the tribes of the Americas. And they had no high king uniting them. There were over 60 of them. They had names like these. McCarthy. Let me know if you have any of these in your family tree. I'd like to know if I'm amongst royalty. McCarthy, O'Sullivan, O'Driscoll, O'Brien, O'Neill, O'Donnell, or MacDonald. Well, most of those chieftains stayed neutral. They neither helped the English nor the Spanish. Some helped the English, but would not be considered disloyal. You can't put your nationalistic view of Ireland into the tribal mindset back then. And some supported the Spanish. Those that supported the Spanish were O'Neill and O'Donnell from the north. They were already rebelling against Queen Elizabeth, using guerrilla warfare tactics. For them, the Spanish in Kinsale was their enemy's enemy. So they marched 350 miles from the north through a bitter winter to Kinsale to help the Spanish. And when they arrived here, Kinsale was surrounded by the English. So the Irish camped 8 miles inland and now surrounded the English also. Now we had a double siege. 3,500 Spanish in town here, 6,000 English on the high ground, and 7,000 Irish in the countryside. So it was a sandwich formation, we'll say, with the English being the meat of the sandwich. Between their Spanish enemies in town, their Irish enemies outside. And the English were outnumbered, 10,500 to 6,000, if the Irish and Spanish could unite. And it was that attempt to unite that led to battle. The Irish decided, let's try and unite with the Spanish, launching a surprise attack on the English. And what better moment for a surprise attack than Christmas Eve of 1601. It's like Washington crossing the Delaware Christmas Day, many years later. The Irish were hoping to gain the element of surprise. However, it turned out to be a bad day for the Irish. Because as they were marching in, think of Braveheart the movie now, those Irish guerrilla warfare expert rebels, marching in towards Kinsale, 5 miles up the river, they were shot to be intercepted by the English cavalry. So word got out, the English were ready, and there you had the Irish guerrilla warfare experts up against the English cavalry on an open battlefield. There was only going to be one winner there, the English. The English outmaneuvered and beat the Irish in a lightning victory of 3 hours. The battle was over so quickly that by the time the Spanish marched out to help, too late. It was all over. And after the battle then fell apart, the chieftains marched northwards in defeat, and the Spanish sailed home south, taking hopes of Irish freedom with them. And you might say to me, rightly so now, if the Battle of Kinsale lasted 3 hours, and if the English won, why is it such a significant battle? This is one of the 3 important battles in understanding modern Ireland, along with the Battle of Clontarf, about 1,000 years ago, and the Battle of the Boyne, 1690. This battle is important because, now, and I know we've covered a lot of history here now, up to now, but tune right in if you can for the next 5 minutes, because I'll explain to you now how this battle led to the border with Northern Ireland and descriptions such as these. The Scots-Irish, or the Dark Irish, or the Black Irish. Have you heard of those descriptions? First of all, Northern Ireland. Are any of you going to Northern Ireland later? Excellent. Well, Phil, when you're crossing the border, remember Kinsale, because the border with Northern Ireland would not exist without this battle 400 years ago. And I bet many of you wondered years ago, why was Belfast on the news? For all the wrong reasons 30 years ago. Comes back to Kinsale. And makes a lot of sense if you follow it through this way. O'Neill and O'Donnell, who lost the Battle of Kinsale in 1601, they governed in the north. And they were so weakened by losing here that they lost all their lands in the north. And it was their lands that were then granted to mostly Scottish farmers who moved across. The so-called Scots-Irish. They were mostly Presbyterian farmers, which meant when they arrived in the north, they could not marry the Catholics who were already there. So there began the religious divide in the story of Northern Ireland. A religious divide between the Scottish migrants, Presbyterian, and the Catholic subjects of the chieftains who were already there. And because of lack of intermarriage ever since, across Presbyterian Catholic lines, that division remains centuries and generations later. This explains to then the border, because in 1922, Michael Collins from Cork here, a rebel, was sent to London to negotiate a treaty of independence from the United Kingdom. Like the Brexit negotiations we all hear about. But he could only negotiate independence, Michael Collins, for 26 of the 32 counties. Because the 6 counties in the north said, we'll speak for ourselves. The majority of people living up there had and have strong family roots in Scotland, rather than Cork or Kerry or Dublin down here. So their loyalties through their Scottish roots would be to the United Kingdom. So you see the border was drawn there, and the rest is history in that sense. So if those Scottish migrants were Catholic, probably they would have got stirred into the melting pot by now, 400 years later, and maybe no border in that sense, you know. But there you go. Although we're all watching this space. It's an exciting time to be in Europe with Brexit and the elections, the snap elections. They're in a couple of weeks now, are they? 2 weeks or?
8th of June.
8th of June. The Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Theresa May, called a snap election. Now what's that? That means you'll vote in 6 weeks. It'd be refreshing free from the States, you know? A snap election. So you've no time to think, you know? You know, whereas you get too much time to think, I think, the campaigns. But so that's taking place right now in Northern Ireland. You'll see the election posters up. But even with all the debate about Brexit and all this, most of the people in Northern Ireland will